Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Edwin Mourinho, and on behalf of the conference board, it's a pleasure to welcome you all here for this webcast. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, happy Little Rock Friday, as I like to refer to my Thursdays. Glad you were able to join us, and I'm looking forward to this particular webcast. I think you are too. Obviously, you're here. So, let's get started. Today's topic, as you can see here, is growing more diverse change champions in DE&I efforts, the importance of involving the white men. So welcome to all of you. Well, what will we be covering here today? So our objectives for today are to identify specific mindset shifts that enable white male leaders to recognize their critical role in utilizing their insider positions to foster inclusive environments. We're going to learn some techniques to present DE&I efforts that's equally relevant to executives by aligning the DE&I change initiatives with topics they value, such as leadership development, fostering a culture of collaboration and trust, innovation and safety. And lastly, they will provide you some methods to give white male leaders with an enhanced understanding of the personal and professional benefits they can derive from engaging in these efforts. At the end of the day, this is about leadership. So welcome to that. So who are our speakers today? On my behalf, Edwin Mourinho, Senior Fellow from the Conference Board, also President of the Human Intelligent Workplace. I have here with us our co-founder and CEO, Michael Welp. I have our Senior Consultant, Janice Murray. And lastly, our VP of Learning and Consulting, Mark Williams. And with that, I'm not going to waste any time. I'm going to turn it over to them so that they can engage with all of you and share with you some great words.
And this is Michael Welp. Welcome, everybody. I just want to talk a little bit about our brand. You may have heard about our company as White Men as Full Diversity Partners, which we started 27 years ago. And that's a mouthful that catches people's attention. And it's designed for a very specific way of changing the industry so that white men are not on the sidelines, but more an integral part of DEI efforts. And there's lots more in that story to tell, how we got formed, what kinds of things we've come across along the way. And as we did more work globally and not always focused on white men, we also have a brand, Full Diversity Partners Global. And some of that is around engaging men as gender equity champions worldwide and just all kinds of different layers. And then the new brand this year, we've created Full Partner Leadership. And all three of these brands have the same mission. We help leaders create partnerships and cultures where everyone thrives. The leadership umbrella, as Edwin said, this is all about leadership. It's about transforming cultures in organizations. And so Full Partner Leadership as a brand really looks at what are the pain points in an organization. Sometimes it's around trust. Sometimes it's around retention. Sometimes it's about innovation. And really growing through leadership development, experiential leadership development, change agents to address those. So it's not always titled and labeled as a DEI initiative. Sometimes it's a leadership development or culture change initiative. But all those brands are different areas to come through the doorway with us. And our magic sauce is experiential learning, and you'll hear about that in this hour. I want to also mention from the get-go some free tools that you can access. That's on the next slide. You want to pop that up, Brian? My book that I wrote about engaging white men in diversity is a free Kindle download today. So you can go on to Amazon and download that anytime today as a free Kindle. And we have a page, a book page on our website. If you go to 4daystochange.com or you go to that QR code, there's a whole list of free tools to engage white men. There's a link to my TED Talk, which is a great tool to intro to white guys. There's a whole discussion guide that goes with the book. That's a free discussion guide, free video companion series for cohorts of white men to use the book as a journey. There's book chapters, there's podcasts around white men and diversity. There's an upcoming lab that we'll talk about in September. That's one of our classic white men's immersion learning labs. So there's lots of information, lots of free resources there. So go click on that sometime during the hour and you can get access to that. So want to introduce Mark, who's going to give us some background around the society headwinds in DEI, all the changes and turmoil that you experience around this work. He's going to sort of pull apart some of the threads in that.
Thank you, Michael. As many of you are experiencing or are aware of, we are in a time of national debate about the most important values that bind us together as a nation. And one of the values that we are debating is how are we going to handle identity differences in our society? We have gone through a period moving from pretty much race relations to multiculturalism, to diversity and inclusion, to diversity, inclusion, and equity, diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. And all of those movements emerged over the good part of 30 or 40 years. Now it would appear that we've hit a brick wall, and there's a lot of disillusionment, feelings of reverse discrimination. And so we see a context here with these 8 items where there are lots of federal actions and executive orders that we've experienced over the last 5 years. We've gone through a debate about critical race theory and a backlash to that. During COVID, maybe you'll remember the parents' rights movement began, and there was lots of information being handed out and disseminated at public schools about the harm that diversity, equity, and inclusion created. The media is very active, traditional and social media, taking positions in this conflict, but a lot more of it being negative and anti-DEI. Many state legislative bodies have taken action to curtail DEI. Corporations and institutions are beginning to react, educational institutions. Judicial decisions have come our way, the most important on affirmative action. And it was that moment that you began to see many large companies pull back on the resources and commitments to DEI. And now, without a doubt, DEI is a part of the political arena. We cannot avoid that anymore. And there are ideological sides to this debate. So that's a little bit about the context that we're all experiencing. So to be in this environment and have a conversation about white men is actually courageous in this moment. And here we are, joined by all of you to be a part of that. Next slide, Ryan. So what happens as all of these conflicts emerge? If you'll just advance it for me, click by click. There's still some people who believe and are stakeholders in the notion that DEI is about individual freedom, my ability to express myself, bring my voice, and be accepted for who I am. So at the core, that's still very much a part of what we're doing in this work. And there are other stakeholders who believe that the work that we're doing is about organizational effectiveness, inclusion, engagement, innovation, creativity, and diversity of thought. And still there are others who believe that this work is about social justice, the representation and equity of all identities, and looking at various arenas in our society related to equity, health, banking, employment, housing, education, and law enforcement. And still there are others whose voices are getting louder and stronger who believe that we should be focused on social cohesion. And they're launching initiatives that have us begin to question issues like unity, patriotism, shared identity. What kinds of values do we commit to together? Shared ideals, and what are we willing to sacrifice within our identities in order to be a part of this larger whole that we call America. And then there's a growing voice around social continuity, where the dominant and majority voices across many identity dimensions are saying, hey, look, we've messed up the social hierarchy. There was one, and there needs to be one, and we need a dominant religion. And you'll see lots of actions related to religion popping up. We need a dominant language. We need strong customs that are tied back over centuries. And we need to reinforce and honor the traditions that brought us this far. So when you look at this picture and you understand that all of these aspects of DEI are a part of the world we're trying to manage in the context that we started with, again, it makes days like this really important and valuable that you're willing to come and hear this conversation in this environment. In many of our client systems, they think we're working on one of these boxes, two of these boxes, three of these boxes, and in some of our organizations, they aren't working on any of them. But because there's so many stakeholders and so many agendas, it's often difficult to get white men who have been outside of the conversation so long oriented to even have the conversation, because if you're just brushing up against this, it can be overwhelming and confusing. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. I think we're going to move into a little bit of a moderated session. And Mark, you're going to start some conversations with me and then eventually Janice too?
Yes, absolutely. So the first question, I know it's what I asked when I first met you, is what in your background or your experience brought you to the point where you thought this was a good idea? What inspired you to focus on white men in diversity?
Well, it was growing up in the Midwest in Iowa. Wasn't a time when I learned much about diversity or working in Minnesota. It was when I moved to Washington, D.C., and I was part of a graduate program in organizational change that had an intensive focus. And I was part of 7 white men in that session. And, there was a lot of awareness for me about being a white male. Before that, I was just Michael. I was an individual. And I was like, wow, if I'm not aware of this, other white men also are not very aware of that we have a gender, that we have a race, and that impacts how we see the world, how we partner or don't partner with others, and whether we engage our fellow colleagues around these issues or not. So I got really curious about that as, what's next for me in my journey. And I had a chance to go as an Outward Bound instructor, went over to South Africa and facilitated a year of interracial team building just after Nelson Mandela's release from prison. And I found myself, I looked into the eyes of the white men there and saw myself. These were guys who were demonized around the world as the oppressors of apartheid. And yet one-on-one, they're good guys, and yet they're part of a system that's in charge and others are conforming to. And it's like, that's not that different than other parts of the world, including where I come from. So I got a sense of compellingness. I need to work with my group, Mark. I need to work with my group of white men. And there's a dissertation that I did when I came back to the US, and I studied the learning journeys of 8 white men who were like doing work full time around this. Some of them, from your years and years of DEI work. And one of the things I found was that they learned almost everything from women and people of color. They did not turn to other white men for any learning around DEI, and they disconnected from white men and were angry at them as a group. And it's almost like a spiritual disconnection from our own group. So I was like, how do I change this? So my colleague, Bill Prodman, and I said, well, let's take white guys, let's put them in the room for 4 days and start to examine ourselves, So if you look at this chart that's up, it explains some of the framing and the mindsets that lead to white men being on the sidelines around this topic. So when you look at race, there's a lot of focus on people of color, conversation on minorities around the world, and then gender, there's a focus on women. Maybe there's a focus on non-binary as well, et cetera. And what does not get focused on or examined is those of us that are white. What's our experience in and out of work, and how's that different? Or being men. working with a company to improve their gender. And in the petroleum company, they developed a state-of-the-art leadership program for women, and they never thought to address, well, wait a minute, what about the men and how the men partnered? So the implications of this is that women and people of color feel like they carry the burden. They have to be the educators, the teachers, the leaders. And so that felt compelling to me, Mark, to say, how do we change this equation? It's not sustainable. How do we get white men to start to take on our role of teaching our colleagues, other white men, about what we don't see, what we don't know, and to help us see that it's a win for us to do this too. It's not just, we're not just helping others with their issues. There's a lot of benefit for us. That's
Thanks,
how I started.
Michael. So how have you managed the name as your business grew and as more people learned about you? Do you still get the same reaction today to the name White Men as Full Diversity Partners as you did 25 years ago?
I think we do. And even more so maybe now because of the political tensions and the politicalization of DEI. There's a lot of media channels that would say, oh, that company's just about blaming white men, or that they're saying white men are the problem. Just if you put the words white men in around a name of something that says diversity, people are like, that's an oxymoron. That just doesn't fit in my brain. Something's off here. And that those don't go together. How can that be? So by having the name, we challenge a lot of those mindsets and assumptions, and we force a conversation that otherwise wouldn't happen from the get-go.
Thank you. And Janice, I'd like to bring you in now. You were a senior practitioner in a large organization, and White Men as Full Diversity Partners came to you as a potential resources. What was your first reaction? What did you see in this that drew you in?
Well, I think I kind of chased them around, to be honest with you, because I was already looking within the organization at how to engage white men specifically in doing this work around diversity and inclusion. So finding someone with whom I could partner and would bring some expertise was really important. And there weren't a whole lot of organizations that did this kind of work. And I don't know that there are today, actually. So finding that alignment, I think I stalked Wmfdp to bring them into the organization and begin to integrate them into our leadership development.
Did you believe it was a risk at the time?
Yes. One of the challenges, I think, around this, engaging white men especially, is, as been stated, this has been the sole responsibility of non-white, those who identify really in that dimensions of diversity, that center bar on this chart, for so long, that inviting white men in had several risks. First of all, the hesitation of white men to, what if I say something wrong? What if I don't get it 100% right? I don't want to be looked at as a, fill in the blank, racist, sexist, homophobe, whatever the case might be. And there were also those who identified with that middle column of the chart that felt that I was taking something away from them. That this is the one thing I have, and now, you're giving it to them. So it was really important to kind of acknowledge that and try to ensure that they stayed engaged and they stayed included, and it wasn't seen as a zero-sum game.
Thanks, Janice. It's almost like you're saying you're dealing with the mindset of scarcity.
Yes, and there also, and I want to acknowledge that a lot of times, with the exception of me and my team, a lot of the work that these folks were doing was off the side of their desk. This was in addition to their day job. And so that sense of personal passion and ownership was something that I had to be really careful that I didn't just rip away and have them feel devalued, left out, whatever the case might be. And they knew stuff I didn't know. So I needed to also be able to learn from them as well.
Thank you. We talked about mindsets. Michael's talked about mindsets. Michael, what have you learned about how to help white men through the process of examining mindsets? You've got some very specific work in that area. And what can you share some of that, and how has it helped white men in their learning?
Well, a lot of times when we have the historical perspective as one mindset, which is unexamined and unchallenged, that mindset itself leads to some of what Janice is talking about, that some people have to carry this and be the teachers and others don't. So we challenge that as a huge mindset, and that diversity is, there's an unexamined aspect for us as white men. But the way we do it typically has to shift because we don't see the full picture. So these mindsets on this next slide are some examples of that. And I just want to welcome the, I think, 415 people who are registered on this webinar, who you're dealing with these challenges every day. Some of you are leading, like Janice, internally, some of these efforts in the systems. And we've learned a lot from our partnership with colleagues like you. So welcome. I'm glad you're here. So the traditional approaches, what we call facilitated by some of white male culture in the US and beyond, is an orientation towards life is filled with problems to solve. What's the problem here around diversity? What am I trying to solve? Is it a numbers thing? Is it retention thing? So, and not seeing it necessarily as it's an ongoing journey, like safety or quality. I'm never going to be done fixing this or addressing this. I can't fix what I don't understand. So I need to start with understanding rather than fixing. As a white male or anybody, I need to take on new perspectives. I need to sit with the questions that arise around this. Should I be colorblind? Should I not be colorblind? How can I do both? And take in some of the layers of complexity and confusion rather than try to jump to fixing something I don't get fully comprehended. So that's number one, Mark. Number two is a lot of times we, as white men in our culture, say, what's the right way to look at this? I'm going to move forward with it, when no, I need to take on what might be contradictory layers of sitting with this, looking at sameness, looking at difference. A lot of white men will look through a lens of sameness and say, wow, why are we doing ERG groups? That's divisive. Why are we focusing so much on diversity? That's dividing us. Why don't we just focus on unity? Not realizing that we need a both and perspective. We need to look at difference in order to see how to come together. Otherwise, we're just basically saying, by treating everybody the same, whose definition of sameness? We're just reinforcing a white male norm of sameness, and everybody's assimilating to our world. We don't even know that's happening. So we have to start to take on layers of complexity around this. Number 3 of 5 here is, we've been, many of us, taught that emotions are sort of like interrupting our rationale or our credible data. So we should put emotions aside. We think of vulnerability as a weakness. And around DEI work and around leadership work, a lot of research now shows that vulnerability is a pure form of courage. It's a strength. And we need to not only see it in others as that, but model it ourselves. And it's okay to say, I'm confused about this topic of race. I'm confused about gender identity. To be authentic, and the more I give myself permission, the more people work for me will have permission too. And to see others' emotions as data and their lived experience as valid, important sources of learning. And the last 2 are critical too. We, again, prioritize action and fixing, and what I name as white male culture. And at times we need to slow down and be more present in the moment. And that's how partnerships are created. So how can I at times be fast, and how can I also slow down and connect in the moment and be impacted by each other and model the kind of partnership that we want to create at work? And the biggest, I think, overall theme is I've got to stop the tendency to try to oversimplify these topics and look for it to put it into black and white. I want the wallet card that says what to say and do and not do. Well, I got to really just take on the complexity of these topics and say, I'm going to sit with the raggediness, my own raggediness. I'm going to be more comfortable being uncomfortable. And so when I take on some of these complementary mindsets to see with new eyes, to partner in new ways, I don't throw away the left side but I don't overuse them. And I find white men with these mindsets, we make breakthroughs in our leadership, in our also our ability to partner at work, but also ability to partner at home. I remember some clients used to get thank you cards from the wives of white men saying, he listens differently to my kids and me. So the idea that this examination around these issues, it helps us in all areas of our life, not just in some leadership role at work.
And your primary methodology is experiential. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can. As you know, we talk about, I came from that background of Outward Bound for 10 years. And of course, you and I have training in NTL, National Training Lab. So all of those threads are about deeply experientializing the learning. And, you know, that fits with these complementary approaches. You've got to give people a chance to have an experience around these issues rather than just dump content in their heads. And so they have to struggle with, what does it look like to have a courageous conversation around some of these topics? What is the scariest conversation to have? Let's put some chairs in the middle of the room and have that conversation and practice some leadership skills. The next slide Ryan can shows how this can be an experiential process of embodying leadership skills that are core, you know, the vulnerable courage, the ability to be in head and heart at the same time, and listening, which creates the skill of empathy, and the ability to see both and with paradoxes and my world's incomplete. I need other viewpoints, and how to sit with the messiness of this to see insider-outsider dynamics. So we create experiences that over, whether it's a 4-hour session, a 2-day or a 4-day session, or a 6-month cohort process, you know, people practice these complex conversations and they get to embody these skills over time. We are what we practice. So we have to practice these skills over time and get them in our bones. And then they're like, if they do that in a laboratory learning environment, they can do that back at work and become agents of change.
Thanks, Michael. So Janice, courage, head, heart, listening, slowing down, paradoxes. How did that go over trying to get your senior white male executives in a room to sit in a circle and talk about these kinds of things? What did that look like? And what was the result?
Well, they didn't always love it. And I think part of it was because of the fact there was this trepidation coming in. You know, in my interaction with them, I was very careful about shame and blame and staying away from that, because nobody wants to feel that way. And so the thing that I appreciated and I was able to articulate to the leaders is the fact that you're not comfortable with all of this does not mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you are a racist or a sexist or a homophobe or any of these other things. What it really means are these are just skills, not just skills. I don't want to oversimplify it, but they can be skills that you can learn and you can practice to begin to shift how you show up as a leader, and framing it in that leadership construct of, you know, my goal is not to turn you into the next social justice warrior. If you become one, great. But what this is really about is how can you effectively show up as a leader, and how can you create a culture where people want to come in, they want to stay, they want to grow, they want to innovate, they want to connect with each other, all of these things that are key to the engagement and the retention of talent. And that talent is not just going to be white male. And so you thinking about This is a talent play. This was what it was for our organization. Everybody else has to think about like, what is the thing for your organization? For us, it was talent, and the relevance to the different parts of the business around ensuring that we were casting as wide a net as possible, and that we were creating a culture that was going to engage those folks, for them to give their best and for them to say to their friends, you know, I work hard, but I am feeling like I have an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to develop, and I want to stay with this company. So there was some resistance. So being prepared for that was helpful, but also being able to connect with what was important to them, not what was important to me. And so listening to them and taking my agenda and putting it aside. Real quick story. I got into this job and I had my little list of questions and my little talking points. I was going to go meet with all these senior leaders and impress them with my knowledge. And the first leader I met with, I asked him my first question. And I don't remember what the question was, because not only did he not answer the question, he spent about 10 minutes talking about the negative experience he had with the person who had been in my seat before. So I knew I had to take my script and toss it out, still being able to craft a vision, but really be listening to how I can connect with what was important for their agenda.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. So, Michael, Janice is talking about where senior leaders are when she meets them and meeting them where they are. What's a process that you've used successfully to guide consultants and leaders from one point to the other?
Well, I was just thinking about that as Janice is talking about. We do have to validate white men where they're at. And I say the perspective, your viewpoint, your view of the world isn't wrong. More likely it's incomplete. So validate and ask a question or two that has them curious and open about a broader viewpoint. So for instance, starting with telling white men that they're privileged from a race or gender perspective is not helpful necessarily, partly because there's so much misunderstanding about the word privilege. But to validate, some of them grew up with a really struggling economic background. So if you validate their what we call outsiderness around a certain dimension that they resonate with, around whether it's economic class or even being introverted or being from a different school or not a different region of the world or something where everybody realizes and sees where they're an outsider. Most of us don't see our insiderness or dimensions of insiderness. And so, but it can be helpful for people to be able to have the outsiderness that they've experienced in the world acknowledged, and then ask them to say, what is it you're an insider about that you may not see? I worked with a large consumer company in Singapore, and there was a white Australian man who was asking about the barriers, and there's 3 Chinese men that said, hey, in this region, we have to write our innovation ideas up, and we don't have the English language skills to write up. So you're not getting our most innovation. So, and he's like, well, I never thought of that, So what are the ways that we don't have to deal with and navigate things that others are navigating? And therefore starting to see where I have insiderness helps me realize that there are other colleagues I'm trying to partner with that are navigating things I'm not. So that's perhaps a more helpful definition of privilege. What are women navigating that I'm not around their day-to-day safety daily on a basis, or you navigating around race and having people think you got your job because of affirmative action, all kinds of layers. So this is not anything, as Janice said, about a conversation about somebody's at fault, somebody's broken, or to blame. This is about, what do I not see that I don't know that gets in my way of partnering with others or amplifying their voices or helping create an environment where everybody can thrive.
It also sounds like, Michael, you're making available the concept of intersectionality to white men, that they're not only just white and not only just men. You opened up the possibility that there's a lot to learn about themselves.
We do. And yeah, we do these 4-day sessions for white men. We do 4 days for mixed groups and shorter sessions for both. But, we break up the myth that all white men are the same. And that, we get them to be curious and explore all the ways that we are different from each other based on all kinds of different pieces. So, the narrative gets much more complex and nuanced, and people get curious about each other's experiences because, you and I might have an experience of growing up in some family dynamics that were quite challenging. And that's just as impactful in our lives as many other dimensions, whether it's race, gender, others. So yeah, the interdisciplinary is intersectionality it's about seeing everybody as whole people, being curious and slowing down and knowing that all the people I lead have all kinds of backgrounds that I don't know, all kinds of layers of, I don't just know somebody because I know their job title. There's all kinds of nuances for me to be curious about in others.
You've used the term insider and outsider. Can you say more about those terms?
Yeah, I mean, as we've worked globally, we find that framework to be more accepted everywhere. You ask anybody around the world, who are the insiders and outsiders dimensions in your current context, and they'll say it, or you can ask them, to what degree do you feel included? To what degree do you feel like you have a voice? And what degree do you feel like you're appreciated for your skills and resources? And, stand on the floor from a 1 through 5 continuum. You'll get the response that everybody has variations of these. And then what are these dimensions that help you feel more outside or have you feel more inside? So, getting people into small groups and brainstorm what are dimensions of insiderness and outsiderness in this part of the organization, and then have them sort of compare and contrast what they drew is an example of an exercise experientially that gets them to reflect on these pieces. And again, what are the insider dimensions that you don't navigate because others are navigating them more?
Thanks, Michael. And Janice, we've got a question, and it seems like it's right up your alley. It reads, how do you respond to groups of white men who ask about having an ERG that celebrates them or attention paid to their traditions and holidays, the same way we talk about events like Pride and Juneteenth? We often get these questions in our organization.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the way that I address that, first of all, kind of stepping back a little bit, is being clear on what the purpose of ERGs are. In the organization I was a part of, it was about supporting groups that have been historically been underrepresented or marginalized throughout the organization. And so part of it was, what's the purpose of the groups? So kind of reinforcing that. And then the other part of it was to support the strategies, the goals of the overall DEI initiative. And so when I was approached by white men about starting a group, first of all, we had we had a process. I worked for a large company. We needed processes. And part of it was, what's going to be the purpose of your group and how is your group going to support these strategies? And so oftentimes what white men who might have come to me, they're only looking at the events. They're not looking at the fact that they have a plan that they put together and how those events align with the various parts of the DEI strategy. And so I would go back to them and say, so here's the process. If you can, take a look at this and see how that lines up, then let's come back and talk about it. so for me, it was about clarity. It wasn't just a bunch of people getting together, putting on events. It was really about ensuring that these groups were in alignment with the overall DEI strategy. And if there were a group of white men that wanted to sign up and do that, then we could talk about how to do that. The other thing I would say is that there were groups such as, I think they were called the Young Professionals at that time, I can't remember, that were heavily, had a number of white men in them as well. And we had white male sponsors for a lot of these groups. And so, there were times I felt when people were coming to me saying, look, they have that and I'm not allowed to have that. And then I think there were some that were genuinely curious and interested about how to start something like that.
So a part of your job was discerning to try to figure out what was going on at the root of what was being presented to you.
Yeah, which I did with everybody. This wasn't just for if a white man, made that inquiry.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Denise. So I'm going to try to get the both of you to talk about how to create champions, identifying where people are when you meet them, how they show up, and then how to engage them as stakeholders. So Michael, I'm going to ask you to talk about the Champions Roadmap, and then Janice, for you to talk about how you strategize stakeholders and engaging them.
Yeah.
So Michael, can you start?
I can. And Ryan put up this another slide, which we created in the last few years. That's kind of a continuum. And you can, as somebody in Janice's role, look at these and say, where are my leaders? Where are they in their support of DEI, of their passiveness or their activeness? On the left, we have non-supporters, and they might be either innocent deniers, they don't even know why this is important or why it matters, to conscious obstructionists. They might have gotten tuned into a media source that says DEI is bad or this is negative, it's about blaming or whatever. So they're non-supporters. And at some point, they might sit back in the room and say, I'm going to observe this. And I'm going to discern whether I want to even engage or be open to risking my learning. And I call those observers. And, I remember asking, there was 3 white guys in the back of a DEI session for like a session we did. And we went back, why are you in the back row? And they said, when this gets ugly, we want to be by the exit. So their assumption was not that it could be, but it was going to get ugly some point, and they were going to get blamed. So, there's reasons people, feel that and are worried about being beat up, told they're the problem, whatever. So there's reasons that people are on the left end of the continuum here from what they've seen or read or experienced. And they have to learn that this environment is safe and welcoming and open, and they can show up with curiosity. And they might move to the stage of learner where they actually are hungry for the learning. They start to see that there's benefit from them. This is coming from a place of support and love. It's not coming from blame or shame, at least our work. And, they're having some awareness and skill building, transitioning around those mindsets, learning some of the skills of listening to connect versus fix or debate, being able to have difficult conversations that they didn't realize they could have. And at some point they become a willing partner and they start to learn about allyship. How can I support women more? How can I support colleagues of color or other differences? And how can I stand alongside them and amplify their voices and be a backup and be a support? I continue to learn what they need and how to support them, how to repair when I offend them. And then advocate is when I stand in front of them and start to initiate change. And I might be starting to interrupt my colleagues, other white men perhaps, around some of their intentional or unintentional exclusion. That can be as simple as your classic male salesman at a car salesman who only talks to the man. When the woman is the one buying the car, so lots of situations. And then you become a more sophisticated version of what we call disruptor, removing the barriers like that or challenging those norms that are in the systems. And then the final version on this chart is sponsor, where you have the backs of other people going through this continuum. You might support financially resources for this or help politically sustain change. So if you're somebody like Janice, you're looking at, well, where are my executives along this continuum? And, you know, who's at the left end, who's at the right end? And I think, Janice, you probably have figured out how to leverage that insight.
Mm-hmm.
Well, figured out might be overstating, but have some experience with that around engaging stakeholders across the organization. So Ryan, if you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I've talked a lot about leaders at this point, and yes, they are critical, and there are stakeholders across the organization. So when I was thinking about this, and some of this I learned, you know, just through my experience, was that center circle of me, of really thinking, what is it that I actually control and can accomplish without the support of anyone else? And it was actually very little, because there was only so far that our reach could go. And so, but what we could control, and really lean into, was thinking about tools, frameworks, things like that, that we could begin to employ across the organization. And then if you go into that next blue layer, you know, the people that I thought about engaging and sponsoring the initiatives, it would be great if they were all leaders. And in a lot of cases there certainly were our employee resource groups who were very, very good oftentimes at reaching out to leaders, and engaging them in ways that I couldn't, and really thinking about what is their level of influence in the organization and how to partner with them more effectively. The way I used to put it was off of my desk and move it to more their desk with my support and advocacy. And then the next one out are the leaders. And I just have to say two things before I go any further. First of all, I had a CEO who was a champion, and he was not afraid to ask the questions, and he was not afraid to advocate for this work at the company. So I was blessed with a CEO that was a champion. And then I had partners and collaborators who were very much involved in the implementation of this work. I partnered with the HR teams across the business. We worked together, we collaborated together, and I had to be willing to listen to them, because I had kind of this, I could have this one size fits all mindset. And one of my partners came to me and said, Janice, this sounds good, but this is not going to work in this part of the business. I needed to be willing to hear that and to shift the approach to accommodate that particular part of the business with their partnership. And there were others too, in communications and just other areas of the corporation, that maybe they didn't have like that positional power, but they knew how to make stuff go. And they also could pull you back from the cliff, which I often needed help with. And then that outside circle, who are those that are open to learning, that can be engaged through training, through ERG involvement, the people that might come to you and say, I have this question, I'm not even comfortable asking it. That's the question that I want to hear. And so kind of keeping them in enough to know that they can grow in this as well. And finally, there are going to be those who are resistors, who are non-supporters. And I want to make a distinction here. When I'm talking about non-supporters, I'm talking about people who may be resistant, who may not engage. I'm not talking about those who are practicing discriminatory practices. Those need to be addressed in a very, very different way. But, there are those that are going to be resistant. And is it me that maybe can get to them, or are there others that perhaps can engage with them to get them more involved? So just thinking more broadly about where people are and meeting them where they are.
Thank you, Janice. Well, I think our time has gone by very quickly. I'd love to hear from both of you, starting with Michael. What were some ahas you noticed over the years as you worked with folks, moving them from maybe closed resistor at the beginning of their learning journey all the way through to becoming a champion? When did you see light bulbs go off, and what did that look like? If you could just give us a couple of examples as we wind down. Michael?
That's a good question, Mark. I think the thing that's been wonderful for a lot of our work is we've had extended amounts of days with people, and we can watch them sort of have a light bulb go off 24 hours in. Sometimes they just need to land for a while and get into a reflective mode that they've never been in before around these topics and these questions, and realize, wow, there's something for me to gain here. I'm not just helping other people with their issues. This has to do with, and they'll explain maybe to their spouse after the first night some of what they're learning, and they'll hear some validation there. Oh yeah, I have to deal with this all the time. You haven't thought about that? And so sometimes that interface is important back and forth. But realizing, that as I put in the chat a little minute ago, somebody asked a question about, the culture of efficiency and stuff. I always, like to say strength overused is a weakness. So the culture of white male culture has created the rugged individualism, action orientation, rationality. That's created a lot of success in the country and in companies, and overusing it has created problems. Too much of a rugged individualism. I don't ask for help. I don't have permission to say I need help or I'm confused. And to be able to balance the strength of the culture without calling it bad, just saying it can be overused, that's a framework. So I've learned, Mark, little frameworks that can be helpful. Again, like your real view isn't wrong, it's just incomplete. But more than anything, I watch men grow the ability to start to challenge their colleagues, and they have to ground this in their own experience when they find their own examples of, wow, I never thought about the challenges my daughter goes through around safety, or my spouse or my coworkers daily. And when they can start telling those stories to their peers, that takes the burden off of others to be the educators. And they're the ones that can then go, as Janice says, address some of those resistors or non-supporters. So we need to pick up that slack and see our role in engaging our group. And that's that. But the other biggest aha, I think, is really when we can embody and seeing this as a win-win. There's a lot of fear around this topic. There's a lot of assumptions that if others gain, we lose. So the myth that this is a zero-sum game is something to challenge. And nothing's more powerful to challenge than white men telling real stories that are unarguable about how they've gotten a win-win out of this, how their lives are enriched as much as everybody else's are too.
Thanks, Michael. Janice, do you have a couple to add?
Yeah, I would echo everything that Michael said. And, for me, it was acknowledging the fact that I believe most people walked into the office, because at the time, that's what we did, every day trying to do the best job that they could. And that even if it didn't always look that way and feel that way for me, that it was important for me to enter the relationship with, I'm doing the best that I can here, and then how can I help you, support you in doing more and stretching yourself, and acknowledging when that happens. And I think that a light bulb that for me, outside of the 4-day workshops, there's a lot of light bulbs that go off there, but was hearing someone down in the organization, several levels down, person of color, talk about their experience to a leader in a forum that we had. And so having the leaders really listen to what it was like for that person to come in there every day for years. And you could see the look on his face of, I had no idea that this was happening to you. And so don't have your leaders shy away from hearing the real experiences of people in the organization, because that gets to that heart, and that in many cases can be much more sustainable than an Excel spreadsheet of numbers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you, Janice. Michael?
There was a colleague, a couple of leaders in a session I did recently, and this white guy was like, wow, it's literally like there's two organizations that we work in. There's the one I work in, which is pretty much easy every day or has its challenges. And then there's the one that I'm hearing the women in our organization work in, and they're facing things I never knew existed. And I'm horrified about that. So coming to see the different realities of what it's like for different folks in the same system, where I might have some tailwinds, I might have some headwinds, but others have other headwinds that I didn't even know was going on. So, Mark, should I mention the tools again as a reminder?
Yes, before we turn it back to Edward. Please do.
Yeah, there's a couple slides Ryan's going to flash through back again. This 4daystochange.com. You can, get the link to the website with all the free tools, the downloads, the book chapters, the discussion guides, all that stuff that can go with what's the free Kindle book today. Those are tools for white guys to engage. The TED Talk is a great one to get some white guys intrigued with. Sometimes they use that book as a cohort of guys, and the tools for the discussion guides and the podcast episode can be also helpful for some white guys to hear other white guys talk about their learning journey. So all of that. And then we also have a September 4-day learning lab for white men, what we've been doing. And there's a link to that there. It's also on the 4 Days to Change page. Everything is all the free tools there. And then this one that Ryan said links right to that brochure. So hopefully some folks might want to send a couple white guys to that learning lab to experiment and see what they'll come back saying, what they'll bring back.
Thank you. Edward.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, all. Michael, Janice, Mark, great material. I appreciate it. I saw a lot of good comments in there. Obviously, people were really enjoying it and getting some things out of it. So hopefully you'll have some people attend this. Because to the comment you made earlier, Michael, at the end of the day, this is fundamentally about leadership. So how do you engage and how do you have a more inclusive and tap into the diversity, the growing diversity of your workforce that's going to continue to grow this way. So excellent material. Thank you so much for sharing. Like always, I'm a avid learner, so it's been very helpful for me to hear some of your examples and experiences that you've been through. So thank you so much for that. So hopefully it was helpful for the others as I saw. And in line with this one here, just wanted to share with you all some upcoming webcast programming. Here you have the dates. Are you redesigning your workplace for the hybrid world? Because it is real, live, and going to continue to grow. So how is your organization doing this? There's a lot of great research out there basically saying people are really enjoying this hybrid environment. Mastering benefits is another one coming behind that, July 17th. Future-proofing the talent portfolio at Booz Allen, coming up August 8th. And one of my favorites is how to reskill your workforce for the future, particularly in this day and age of AI and what's going to happen there, all that stuff, August 13th. So a lot of good information coming out. Hopefully you all attend again. Thank you so much for that. And so hopefully this was helpful for you. Again, I want to welcome you all. Thank you all for participating. Also, here's a way to sign in and get your custom convenient access to all the information we have, MyTCB. So please log into that or register for that if you haven't already. There's even a short video there. So this has been great. I hope it has been for you. I've really enjoyed it. and look forward to the next time we get together again. Again, Michael, Janice, and Mark, thank you for a great session. Really appreciate it. And everybody have a great little Friday, as I like to call my Thursday. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you, Evan.
Thanks, everybody.